Hey guys, this is a tutorial video for the Hall of Fame Bets player deep stats page. So today we're going to take a look at the deep stats page, which is particularly efficient at helping you look at and analyze different player props. So for tonight, we'll be taking a look at Jalen Brown, the player for the Boston Celtics. The Celtics are obviously playing the 76ers tonight in Game 2 and are coming off obviously that tough loss in Game 1. So Jalen Brown's line tonight is, I believe it's 24.5 points. And so obviously let's first start off by taking a look at the over. So you may have already grasped this, but this is kind of the interface for the player deep stats pages. So we'll be taking a look at all the different filters. How do you sort filters? How do you find props with good value? So these are the different filters here at the top. We can sort by this and last season, this current season, which is what we're currently looking at, last 20 games, last 10 games, and last 5 games. And then down here are some of the more unique filters that we're going to look at a little bit later. If we scroll down here, this little piece here gives you an idea of the opposition that Boston are playing. So obviously we know they're facing the 76ers. This gives you an idea of the 76ers, where they rank in terms of points allowed per game, rebounds per game, assists per game, 3 points, and so on and so on. And then this gives you an idea of how they perform against small forwards specifically. So obviously, this is a pretty interesting and pretty unique, but obviously we know Philadelphia, one of the better teams in the league, one of the better defenses in the league, and that's pretty much what this graph here indicates as well. Obviously, they allow the least amount of points to small forwards, the least amount of rebounds to small forwards, so a particularly tough matchup for Jalen Brown tonight. And then overall on the team side of things, they're also a very good defense, very good rebounding team as well. So a tougher matchup for Jalen Brown tonight, but obviously the Celtics are one of the better teams in the league as well. So if we scroll down here, we can click on this button here to show the implied odds. So this gives you an idea of how Jalen Brown has performed in recent games. So in the last 5 games, he's hit in 60% of games. Last 10, 63, so on and so on. And then down below, it gives you an idea of this implied odds, which are really important because you can line up these implied odds, for example, based on the season in comparison to the odds offered by your sports book. So again, his performances all around look pretty good. So we're going to have to dive in depth here into why his line is probably this low tonight as well. If we scroll down here, this is more of your traditional game log, and again, depending on the stat category you select, this is the color coding that you'll get. Red means he's gone under the line, green means he's gone over. So again, pretty good performances in the last 5 games, and obviously the P here stands for playoffs as well. So here's more of your traditional game log where you can sort. You can look at the score, minutes played, and then pretty much every stat that you can bet on as well. So we'll scroll up here to start to take a look at some of the more specific features. So if we wanted to hone in on his last 10 games, we could kind of get the visual of that. So obviously he's hit in 3 of the last 4 games and 3 of the last 6 if we extend that out. And then we can look at last 20 games as well. These games here are games where Jalen Brown didn't play. So as we know, towards the end of the season, a lot of teams, were resting players. And so this gives you an idea of these are the games that they didn't play in. So that's also important to take into account. Like if we're looking at last 10, okay, it's the last 10 games that the Celtics had, but Brown only played in 8 of them, which is the games that are showing right now. So we'll go back to the season and we'll start to sort by the different more unique filters on our deep stats page. So here's the first button, and obviously very applicable right now with the Celtics in the playoffs and in general the NBA in the heart of the playoffs right now. This will give you an idea of what Jalen Brown's performances are in playoffs. So he's gone over his line in 4 of the Celtics' 7 playoff games, and obviously the Celtics went on a big run last year, so we can go back to see what his performances were like. So again, 32%, not a great stats for the over, but again, there's some context. Obviously, Brown's developed a lot this season and has become more of a key player and a key scorer as well for the Celtics. So he's gone over his line in 3 of the last 4 games in the playoffs, which is a pretty good indicator that there might be some value in going on the over tonight. If we scroll down here, this will give you his averages on the playoffs as well. So he's been playing 38 minutes a game, which is important because we'll use the minutes filter later to kind of filter out how he's performed in games where he's played maybe 38 or more minutes. And obviously we see down here he's played 40 plus minutes in 3 of the last 4 games as well. He's averaging 26 points for the playoffs, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, and so on and so on. So that's his performances in the playoffs. If we go off that and we click on Philadelphia, this will give you an idea of how he's performed against Philadelphia this season, and we can even go back towards last season as well. So again, historically, he's got some decent performances against Philly in the past. He's got 50. He's hit in 50% of games. He's hit in 3 of the last 5 games as well. If we scroll down here, maybe give a bit of an indicator. Okay, this game he only had 4 points, but he only played 18 minutes. We'd have to look into further there, like why he only played 18 minutes in that game. But besides that, some good numbers against Philly as well. So again, I'm really liking the over on Brown tonight based on what we've seen so far. We can keep this filter on at Philly, and we can sort specifically in home games against Philly. Okay, so his last 2 home games against Philly, he didn't go over, but he had 23 in game 1, so pretty close to 25, and then he had 4 again that one game that we pointed out a bit earlier. That might be a bit of an outlier as well. We can take off the Philly feature, and we can just look at home performances over the last 2 seasons. We can look at this season in particular. So again, not a huge difference in the numbers. He's actually technically performing a little statistically worse in home games as well. So that's something to keep in mind. But again, just a small difference, 2%, which might be explained when you go further into the game log as well. So that's how he's been performing in home games so far this season. We can go off that filter. And then if we go to minutes played, and remember I said this was an important one because we saw that Jalen Brown was averaging about 38 minutes per game, in the playoffs. So this will give us an idea of how he's performed in games where he's played 38 or more minutes. And I apologize, my computer's a little bit on the slower side. But already we can start to see the statistical differences in games where he's played 31 or more minutes, and we can drive that up to 38, which is what he's averaging in the playoffs right now. We'll actually leave it at 36 because we don't want, obviously he might not play 38 exact minutes. That's just the average for what he's averaging in the playoffs. So we'll leave it at 36, but a pretty staggering difference. At 75% of games he's hit in when he's played 36 or more minutes, which is he's averaging 38 for the playoffs. So this is a pretty good value bet right here based on what we're seeing in this data. And again, he's gone on a pretty good hit streak as well. He obviously didn't hit last game in game 1, but if we look at some of these other games, he's hitting a decent amount of times when he's playing 36 or more minutes as well. So that's a pretty good use of the minutes filter, and I think it's really important to emphasize that when you're using the minutes filter, you have to look at what he's averaging, in playoff games against specific teams, maybe with specific injuries. So let's say hypothetically, this will help us transition well, but let's say hypothetically Jason Tatum was injured tonight. I know he's not, but let's just say hypothetically he was. How is Brown perform in games when Jason Tatum has been injured? And again, this makes more sense. He's gone over his line in 83% of games where Tatum is out. He's actually only gone under once this season when Tatum has been out, which makes sense because if Tatum's not playing, that means Brown is getting a lot more looks, getting more shots up. His field goal attempts are up here, which we'd be able to see down here on the game log as well. And we can actually go back to last season to see, 73% of games when Tatum's out. So again, it all makes sense, but that would just help confirm some of our initial thoughts. And then we can also look at games, let's say Tatum's playing, how has he performed with Tatum? And again, not a huge difference because Tatum's not a very injury-prone player, and so a lot of the games they've played together, there's not a huge difference there. But what is clear is that if Jason Tatum was injured, Brown would be a really good bet because his numbers increase pretty drastically when Tatum is out as well. So we can go down here, and these last kind of final filters, win and loss, will allow you to look at how much him going over his line correlates to winning or losing. So again, not a huge difference here. 70% of games Boston's won, Brown has gone over. Again, that's comparison to hitting 69% of games on the season, so not a huge difference there. And let's see if there's a big correlation from when he loses. Probably not a huge difference as well. So again, this filter is less so important to look at whether or not players going to go over or under the line, and more so to see is there a correlation between maybe putting a money line in your parlay to make like Celtics money line Brown over points, if there's any correlation with that. I know, for example, with Luka Doncic and the Mavericks, there's a big correlation between if he's scoring 30-plus points, the Mavericks are more likely to win, which is pretty obvious and a given, but that's just something that allows you to research your parlays as well, which we'll get to a little later too when we get into our parlay optimizer video. So I know you guys are going to tune in for that too. And then these last kind of final filters will allow you to look at his performances depending on the rank of the opposition. So obviously the 76ers, one of the best teams in the league. This will allow you to sort, and this that automatically puts where the 76ers are ranked in the standings on this timeline here. So let's say, for example, they're playing like the Houston Rockets, one of the worst teams in the leagues. You could sort this to see how Brown has performed against some of the worst ranked teams in the league. I think rank is less so important, and it's more so important to look at the offensive rank and then the defensive rank as well. So obviously 76ers one of the better defenses in the league, so this will allow us to sort how Brown has played when he's played against the best defenses in the league. And again, his numbers kind of go down, which makes sense because he is playing against better defenses, also a smaller sample size, but this is going to give you an idea of how Brown has performed against the top 25% of defenses in the league. And then if you're looking more specifically at some defensive stats, so let's say, for example, we wanted to see Brown's steals. So, how has Brown's steals, against teams that are like ranked in, let's say, the top half of offensive. So stats, not a huge difference there, but 68%. So, pretty not a huge difference there. But this would be more applicable when you're looking at kind of those defensive props that you might be looking at. Rebounding, this is, again, important. This will give you an idea of where Philly ranks in terms of their rebounding. And this will give you, this is pretty important when you're looking at rebounding props, particularly with centers and power forwards who are more likely to be impacted depending on how a team ranks on the rebounding side of things. And then the last one is threes allowed. So obviously Philly allow some of the least three-pointers per game in the league. If you look at teams, again, not to pick on the Rockets too much, but they're one of the teams that allows the most three-pointers in the league. So they would be down here, and you could kind of sort, let's see, like how Jalen Brown performs in games against, the worst three-point teams in the league, and then we could sort by threes. Okay, his stats aren't that much better, and maybe that's because he's playing less minutes because they're some of the worst teams in the league. We just have to dive deeper into that. But for some players, there's definitely a correlation between how many three-pointers they hit and the team they're playing and how many threes that team allows. And then the last kind of line here is fouls. I think, Jalen Brown's not a player that typically gets into a lot of foul trouble. He only had one foul in game one, averaging 2.6 on the season. We could even sort, we could sort in playoffs. He's averaging, about the same. We haven't actually hit it yet. He's averaging about the same. Fouls in the playoffs. So he's not a player that particularly gets in a lot of foul trouble, but for players who do, this would allow you to see, how do they perform when they're, let's say getting 4 fouls per game, because that's definitely impacting their minutes, which, if they're in foul trouble, they're not going to be playing as much, which might impact some of their lines with three-pointers or points or whatever line you might have picked for them. So in general, that's pretty much the intro to the player deep stats page. It's perfect for looking for player props, for analyzing player props that you might want to input into parlays. But in general, it's the perfect tool, and it's really important to utilize these filters to kind of look at a player's performances and to dig deeper into whether or not there may be any value in taking the player props with them. So thank you guys for tuning in, and stay tuned for more tutorial videos as well.